They were the unlikeliest of lovers, a decorated police chief and the ex-con she once helped rehabilitate. On the surface, theirs was a story of redemption, a respected woman of the law guiding a troubled man toward a better life. Behind closed doors, though, that mentorship evolved into something far more intimate, and far more dangerous. Their bond, kept hidden from the world, simmered with tension, passion, and secrets too heavy to bear. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And when love is fueled by guilt, control, and forbidden desire, the line between devotion and destruction blurs in terrifying ways. How does a hidden relationship built on secrecy and second chances descend into savagery? What happens when forbidden love becomes a deadly game of obsession and betrayal? On the night everything unraveled, neighbors reported hearing a woman's voice shrieking through the walls, "If I can't save you, I'll bury you." Followed by a sickening thud that would later haunt crime scene photos drenched in blood. Before we dive into this chilling tale, like this video and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true crime stories of love, lies, and murder. Vernetta Lorraine Brody was the kind of woman who walked into a room and commanded silence. At 48, she was more than just the chief of police in Lorain, Ohio, she was a force. With 2 master's degrees, a reputation for strategic brilliance, and a deep, unwavering belief in restorative justice, Vernetta wasn't just a law enforcer, she was a movement. Her Second Pathway program, aimed at rehabilitating ex-convicts, was both lauded and criticized for its boldness. She believed that redemption was possible, even for the most broken men. To the outside world, she was incorruptible. A queen in blue. A widowed leader who had lost her husband too soon, but had buried her grief beneath a badge and a mission. But behind the badge, behind the tailored suits and eloquent speeches, was a woman with secrets. Dangerous ones. Zaire Rashawn Colton was never meant to be anything more than another success story. At 27, he was fresh out of prison after serving 6 years for armed robbery and drug trafficking. The streets had carved hard lines into his face, and his eyes carried the weight of a life lived too fast and too recklessly. He wasn't just any ex-con, he was Vernetta's stepson by marriage. The son of her late husband, Mitchell Colton. When Mitchell died suddenly of a stroke, the grief-stricken household reeled, and Zaire, newly released, returned into her orbit at just the right, or perhaps the wrong, time. She invited him into her Second Pathway program. Gave him a job cleaning patrol cars at the department. Offered him the garage apartment behind her house, told him it was temporary, just until he found his footing. But proximity breeds familiarity, and familiarity can be intoxicating, especially when pain, loneliness, and long-buried desires start whispering between the silences. No one in the city suspected a thing. To the public, Vernetta was still the grieving widow, too busy rebuilding a community to entertain personal distractions. Zaire was her project. Her redemption story. The hardened young man being guided back into the light by the very woman who'd once sat across from him in the courtroom as an officer of the law. But redemption has its price. And in their case, the cost was dangerously steep. It started with quiet dinners. Then late-night conversations. Then long, lingering touches that neither of them could explain. Mentorship blurred into intimacy. Lust grew fangs and sank itself deep. And before long, the woman who preached accountability and restraint was sneaking into her own garage at 2 a.m. to crawl into the bed of the man she had once sworn to reform. What they shared wasn't love, it was something darker. Something twisted. Something fueled by grief, taboo, and the power imbalance they both ignored. And still, no one knew. Lorraine still saw Vernetta as their polished, respectable chief. They applauded her speeches, supported her programs, and trusted her word. But beneath the surface of her spotless image, something poisonous was growing. And in the shadows of that garage apartment, 2 broken people were stitching themselves together in the most unholy of ways. What started as salvation would soon become scandal. And what began in secret would end in blood. Zaire Colton's past was a shadow that loomed over everything. His childhood in the rough, gang-controlled streets of East Cleveland had been a violent, chaotic blur. Raised by a mother who disappeared when he was young and a father who was either absent or abusive, Zaire learned early that trust was a luxury no one could afford. By 14, he was in and out of juvenile detention, a product of the streets that chewed up everyone unlucky enough to call them home. By the time he turned 18, he was already a full-time dealer and an enforcer for a local gang, earning a reputation as someone not to be crossed. Prison didn't break him, it forged him. 6 years inside had hardened Zaire, transformed him into someone who could manipulate and charm with ease, even while carrying a deep-seated, volatile rage that he never fully understood, or learned how to control. When Vernetta offered him a second chance, he saw it as something more. She wasn't just offering him rehabilitation, she was offering him power. Stability. A place where he could exist outside the chaos he'd known. In her, he saw the protection he had craved as a child, the control he had never been allowed to have in his old life. She was a lifeline, or at least, that's how he framed it in his mind. The only woman who had ever seen value in him. The only woman who could help him craft the future he wanted. But with Vernetta came something else, something that began to gnaw at his insides, deeper than he could acknowledge: jealousy. It wasn't just about wanting her, it was about needing her. To him, she wasn't just the woman who'd saved him, she was the only thing he had, and anyone who threatened that would soon learn the depth of his rage. Vernetta, however, didn't seem to fully understand the beast she had awakened. She thought she was helping him heal, but the truth was that Zaire wasn't the kind of man who could simply be saved. His past, his abuse, his time on the streets, the hunger that burned inside him, wasn't something that could be washed away with mentorship or second chances. It was something deeper. Darker. A part of him that Vernetta was too blinded by her own desires to see. Their affair, though intoxicating, was built on a fragile foundation of secrecy. The taboo nature of it kept their relationship a thrilling, dangerous secret. Not just because of the power dynamics, Vernetta, the respected police chief, and Zaire, the ex-con she was supposed to be reforming, but because of the history between them. She had helped raise him since he was a teenager. She had known him as a child, as a broken young man, as the son of her late husband. To the outside world, their relationship was an unforgivable betrayal of everything she had stood for. Yet, the secrecy of it fueled something dark and irresistible. They met in the shadows, their stolen moments igniting a passion neither could seem to control. But it wasn't just the forbidden nature that thrilled them. It was the weight of their secret, a secret that, as time passed, began to eat away at them both. They couldn't keep running from the consequences of their actions forever. Something had to give. And it did. Vernetta, as determined as ever to maintain the illusion of control, found herself facing a complication she hadn't anticipated: Tanisha Caldwell. A fellow officer, and someone Vernetta had always respected, Tanisha had quietly harbored feelings for her boss for years. She admired Vernetta's strength, her tenacity, her grace, but more than that, she had a quiet, burning affection that she had never voiced. When Vernetta's grief for Mitchell's sudden death began to cloud her judgment, Tanisha offered support, even as she sensed something was off. But it wasn't until Zaire came back into Vernetta's life, all reformed and charming, that Tanisha began to see the cracks. She noticed the long, late-night meetings between the two, the subtle tension in Vernetta's eyes when she spoke of him. She wasn't blind. She knew something wasn't right. And though she never confronted Vernetta directly, the suspicion simmered beneath the surface. Tanisha had always played by the rules. But now, the lines were starting to blur. She watched from the periphery, her feelings for Vernetta growing more intense and her doubts about Zaire's rehabilitation growing louder. Was Vernetta really the woman who could save him? Or had she been blinded by her own grief, her own guilt, and her own need for redemption? Tanisha couldn't know it yet, but she was walking straight into a storm. The moment she crossed that line, when she finally voiced her suspicions, when she began to question what Vernetta was truly hiding, was the moment everything changed. Secrets, after all, have a way of bleeding into the light. And when they do, the consequences can be far deadlier than anyone could ever imagine. The tension between Zaire and Vernetta had reached a breaking point. Zaire couldn't stand the thought of being cast aside, of losing the only woman who had ever offered him anything close to love and stability. The cracks in their affair had begun to widen, and Zaire, consumed by his obsession, wasn't willing to let go without a fight. When Vernetta tried to pull away, telling him, in the calmest terms she could muster, that their relationship had been a mistake, that she needed a normal life, and that Tanisha was the future, Zaire's calm facade shattered. His rage didn't manifest in loud outbursts. Instead, it simmered beneath the surface, a quiet storm that would eventually tear through everything. He began sending cryptic texts, his words growing darker and more threatening with each passing day. He started showing up uninvited, lurking in the background as she went on dates with Tanisha, his presence always just out of sight, but close enough to instill a sense of dread in her. He was watching, waiting, never letting her breathe without feeling the weight of his gaze on her. It was the kind of behavior that was easy to ignore at first. The texting. The messages that were just vague enough to make Vernetta question herself. But as the stalking escalated, she realized just how deep Zaire's obsession ran. His affection for her had long since morphed into something darker, more dangerous, a twisted need for control that could no longer be hidden behind the charming exterior he had worked so hard to craft. Everything came to a head when Vernetta decided to attend a family therapy session, the kind of last-ditch effort meant to heal old wounds and help Zaire let go of his past. Mitchell's cousin, Pastor Malcolm Brody, had volunteered to help, offering his services as a mediator to try to help Zaire reconcile with the deep-seated pain he carried. The session was meant to be a safe space, a neutral ground where Zaire could work through his emotions and release the anger that was slowly destroying him. But when they sat down together, Pastor Malcolm, Vernetta, and Zaire, the floodgates opened, and the secrets Vernetta had tried so desperately to bury spilled out. Vernetta, her composure finally unraveling, broke down in front of Zaire and Pastor Malcolm. In the raw, fragile moment, she confessed everything. The affair. The lies. The betrayal. She told them about how it had started, how it had spiraled out of control, and how she had tried to walk away. There was guilt in her voice, shame in her eyes. Fear too. She was terrified of what Zaire might do if he ever truly understood the extent of what she had done. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, there was silence. Pastor Malcolm, stunned by her confession, stared at her with a look of disbelief. It was as if the weight of what she had revealed was more than he could process. He had known that Zaire was troubled, but he hadn't realized just how far the damage ran. He had seen the cracks in Zaire's demeanor, the way he held on to bitterness, the way he carried his anger like a weapon, but he hadn't realized that it was Vernetta's love, or what he perceived as betrayal, that had become the fuel to the fire. Vernetta, Pastor Malcolm finally said, his voice a mix of concern and warning, you need to go to the authorities. Before he does. You don't know what this man is capable of. You need to make sure you're safe. But those words were drowned out by the sound of the door slamming open. Zaire was standing in the doorway, eyes wild, breath shallow. He had been listening. Every word. Every confession. And in that moment, the last shred of control he had managed to maintain slipped from his grasp. You were going to expose me? Zaire's voice was low, guttural, a whisper of something far more dangerous than anyone had ever seen in him. You were going to turn me in after everything I've done for you? The air grew thick with tension, and Vernetta, her heart racing, realized the gravity of her mistake. She had hoped the truth would set them free, that the therapy session would somehow untangle the mess they had made. But Zaire wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for control. And now, as the full extent of her betrayal hit him, there was nothing left to stop him from reacting in the only way he knew how, with violence. Pastor Malcolm tried to intervene, but Zaire was already moving, his rage boiling over. There was no more talking, no more reasoning. There was only the blood, the heat, and the need for retribution. And as the storm of his anger engulfed the room, it became clear that there would be no going back. Vernetta had tried to fix the broken pieces of their lives, but in the end, it wasn't love that held them together, it was the darkness that now consumed them both. And the moment of confession had been the spark that lit the fire, a fire that would leave nothing but ruin in its wake. The rain fell in sheets that night, washing the streets of Lorraine in a cold, relentless downpour. Tanisha Caldwell, soaked to the bone, parked her car in front of Vernetta's home. She had been trying to reach Vernetta for hours, but the calls went unanswered. It wasn't like Vernetta to disappear like this, especially not after the tension had escalated with Zaire. Tanisha had known something wasn't right, but she hadn't prepared herself for the nightmare that awaited her. As she stepped onto the porch, the front door hung ajar, creaking slightly with the wind. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Something was wrong. The door wasn't just unlocked, it had been disabled. No alarm blaring. No sign of forced entry. Only an eerie silence. Her heart raced as she slowly pushed the door open, the scent of cold metal in the air. Inside, the living room was unrecognizable. Shattered glass from a broken lamp lay scattered across the floor, the walls splattered with blood. The furniture had been overturned, as if a violent struggle had taken place. Tanisha's breath caught in her throat as she stepped further into the house, the unmistakable metallic scent of blood growing stronger with each step. This was no ordinary fight. It was chaos, blood everywhere, the remnants of a rage she couldn't yet comprehend. Upstairs, the scene only worsened. Tanisha's legs felt weak beneath her as she approached the bedroom. The door to Vernetta's room was wide open. What she saw inside would haunt her forever. Vernetta lay sprawled across the floor in a pool of blood, her lifeless body twisted unnaturally. Her throat had been slit, the gaping wound too deep for anyone to survive. Her arms were raised defensively, as if she had tried to protect herself, but it had been futile. Her eyes stared blankly, wide open, frozen in terror, capturing the last moments of a life violently taken. The blood soaked into the carpet, staining the once pristine room with an unforgiving, gruesome finality. Tanisha felt a wave of nausea wash over her, her hands trembling. The woman she had admired, the woman she had loved, was gone. But there was no time for tears. She forced herself to keep moving, to search for answers. It didn't take long before she found Malcolm's body. In the guest bedroom, the sight was almost more unbearable. Malcolm Brody, the one man who had tried to help Zaire, who had tried to salvage the wreckage of the broken family, was lying lifeless on the floor. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the face and once in the chest. His blood had pooled beneath him, the once proud pastor now a tragic casualty of Zaire's unchecked fury. Tanisha's stomach churned. The horror of it all weighed down on her chest like a ton of bricks. How could it have come to this? How could Zaire, the man who had been so desperate for redemption, become the monster who destroyed everything? But there were no answers in the carnage. No signs that could explain how things had spiraled so far out of control. Only a trail of destruction that began with a forbidden affair and ended with bloodshed. It was then that Tanisha saw it. Vernetta's laptop, still open, blinking in the dim light. A video message from Zaire. Her heart sank as she clicked play, the screen flickering to life with Zaire's familiar face. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression wild. He was unshaven, unkempt, clearly disheveled. His voice was shaking as he began to speak. "They drove me to this. You drove me to this," Zaire's voice cracked as he stared into the camera. "You lied to me. You chose her over me. You made me feel like a fool. You made me feel worthless. She made me feel like a man, and then she made me feel like a fool." The words were disjointed, barely coherent, as if he had lost all grasp on reality. He rambled about betrayal, about the deep pain he felt. His words tumbled out in a furious jumble, an incoherent rage spilling from his lips. The message was a twisted justification, a way for him to make sense of what he had done. But there was no making sense of it. No reasoning that could explain the brutality of his actions, no way to untangle the web of lies and violence he had woven. He had crossed a line that could never be undone, and in the final moments of the video, his face twisted with anger and self-loathing. As the video ended, Zaire's words echoed in the empty room, "She made me feel like a man. Then she made me feel like a fool." And with that, Zaire was gone. His message left behind a trail of devastation, his whereabouts unknown, his fate uncertain. But one thing was clear, he had vanished, leaving only death and destruction in his wake. The woman who had once been his salvation was gone. The man who had tried to help him was dead. And Tanisha, standing there in the wreckage of everything she knew, realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The community of Lorraine was left to piece together the tragedy that had unfolded in the dark, quiet hours of the night. A city that had once held up Vernetta as a beacon of hope and progress now stood in shock, reeling from the revelation that their beloved chief of police had been living a double life. And as the investigation began, the questions mounted: where had Zaire gone? Was he still out there? And, most chilling of all, was this just the beginning of a larger, more horrifying story? The news of Vernetta's murder sent shockwaves through Ohio. Headlines screamed of betrayal, scandal, and tragedy. The media painted a picture of a police chief, once celebrated as a pillar of progress and reform, now revealed to have been involved in a secret and dangerous relationship with the very man she had once helped rehabilitate. The right-wing media pounced, using the case as a cautionary tale against liberal justice reform, while progressives hesitated to speak out, their silence only deepening the divide. The black community, once united in pride for Vernetta's achievements, was torn. Some mourned the loss of a trailblazer, while others condemned her for her role in the tragedy, calling her a predator. But no one felt the weight of the loss more than Tanisha, who, in an emotional interview, revealed her suspicions about Zaire's possessiveness. "He watched her like she belonged to him," she said, her voice trembling. "Like he owned her soul." As the story unraveled, the public's perception of Zaire shifted. Some labeled him a broken man, manipulated by a powerful woman who should have known better, while others saw him as nothing more than a monster. Pastor Malcolm, the man who had tried to guide Zaire back onto the right path, was mourned the most deeply. His funeral became a gathering of grief-stricken people, a community trying to make sense of the unspeakable tragedy that had struck their town. Thousands attended, paying their respects to a man whose life had been cut short in the most brutal of ways. The firestorm of reactions only fueled the uncertainty that hung in the air. What had driven Zaire to this? What could have been done to prevent it? And as the investigation continued, the questions grew more intense, echoing through the streets of Lorraine. The manhunt for Zaire was nothing short of a nationwide pursuit. U.S. Marshals combed through every lead, every tip, until a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A sex worker, who had encountered Zaire during his time in Milwaukee, remembered him boasting about killing his bitch stepmama. Her chilling revelation led the authorities straight to him. Zaire had altered his appearance, shaving his head, dyeing his beard, and assuming a new identity. He was living under the radar, hiding in plain sight, until the law closed in. The arrest happened outside a strip club, where Zaire had no idea that his past had finally caught up with him. The trial that followed was a media circus, every detail of Vernetta's life and Zaire's twisted obsession laid bare for the world to see. His defense team portrayed her as a woman who manipulated her power, showing the intimate texts they had exchanged, the gifts she gave him, and the private moments captured by surveillance cameras. They argued that she had led him down a dark path, using her authority to control him. But the prosecution was relentless, showcasing Zaire's violent threats, his uncontrollable jealousy, and the haunting video confession he left behind. The jury heard his own words, where he expressed his anger and resentment, claiming that Vernetta had both made him feel like a man and shattered his ego. When the verdict was finally read, it was a moment of closure for some, but there would be no healing. Zaire Colton was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful possession of a firearm, and obstruction of justice. His fate was sealed, life without the possibility of parole. The judge's words lingered in the courtroom, echoing the darkness that had consumed the lives of everyone involved. This case, the judge said, is a chilling example of unchecked power, emotional instability, and forbidden desire. The sentence was a grim reminder of the consequences that followed when love and obsession intertwined in the most dangerous of ways. This case wasn't just about love or power, it was about the way blurred lines and buried trauma can tear lives apart. When truth is hidden beneath layers of ego, lust, and silence, the consequences can be deadly. Malcolm, the one person who truly saw the danger, tried to intervene, hoping to stop the downward spiral. Vernetta, too, tried to escape, believing she could turn things around. But in the end, both paid the ultimate price for a web of deceit, violence, and desperation. Was Zaire a monster, or was he a victim of manipulation? Could Vernetta have stopped this if she'd come forward sooner, confronting the lies that bound her to him? And was Malcolm the only one who had the courage to confront the truth before it was too late? If this story shook you to your core, like and subscribe for more disturbing tales that peel back the mask of modern tragedy.